Hello and welcome back to the Coach's Hour, the podcast dedicated in helping you become the best coach possible. You're here with myself, him, and my co-host is Jawade Graham. Before we get into today's episode, which is all about communication, here's a quick one from us. If you've ever listened to this podcast and thought, fuck man, this actually helped me coach better, then do us a favor and communicate that back to us. Leave us a review, like the episode, and share it with another coach. Because if you don't, well, you're just gatekeeping, right? So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Most coaches, they think that they have a coaching problem, but really, perhaps, it's actually a communication problem. If you ever had a client who repeatedly makes the same mistakes and you feel like you're constantly repeating yourself, then stick around because today's episode is just for you. So, Jawade, what do you think? Coaches, do you think that they suffer from knowledge bias, or do they actually suffer from a lack of understanding and communication?
Both.
Oh yeah? Oh shit.
Well, I say both. I'm half joking, but I'm half serious as well. I think you need both. You can't have one or the other, or you can't have just one or just the other. And with all the knowledge I have, I don't have the most in the world. I'm going to go on a limb here, which might surprise you, and I would say I would prefer to have less knowledge, but be able to communicate it way better. Because I think you could know everything in the world, but if the person that you're speaking to can't take it in, you may as well not know it. And I've seen coaches that don't have the best knowledge get amazing results with their clients because they are people. They know how to get through to the person. And a calorie deficit is a calorie deficit. So you don't need to know the science or all the science behind it. If you can communicate that, you will get results. So I believe both, but is it more important to have the knowledge or the communication?
Do you feel like that? I kind of feel like they kind of come together hand in hand as well. So when you really know a topic or know something, your ability to communicate it is a lot better as well, right?
Yes and no, because I've seen coaches, or I know coaches who I know their clients, and I know the coach is very knowledgeable, but I know their clients don't really like them or don't like the way they communicate, and they still have the client, but the client doesn't like or understand or really communicate in the same way. And the coaches, they're speaking in their scientific terms because that's what they're passionate about, but the client doesn't care about that. And don't get me wrong, they are getting results somewhat because the client wouldn't then stay if they weren't getting results. But I think the whole experience could be better if it was communicated differently. So I do believe you can know a lot about a topic in depth, but still not be effective at communication. And there might be a couple of reasons as to why that is. Like the first one that comes to mind is I've been through it as well. And you might have, like, you know, when you go on a new course and you learn loads of stuff, and then the first session back on a Monday, you go in and you just, every single client that day gets near enough the same session where you explore, I've just learned how to assess the knee. Every client's getting a knee assessment. I'm going to be talking about how the knee has a degree of rotation at this degree. I'm passionate about that. My 8 clients on a Monday, they won't care about that at all. And I've been through that, and I've now learned that just because I've learned that and I know that doesn't mean my clients need to know about that. If they've got a knee injury, I might delve a little bit into it, but I'm careful about the wording I use.
Yeah. Do you think also, I think a part of that is as we develop as coaches, we get too advanced as well. So we almost, we live in this bubble, right? This fitness bubble, and it kind of like, it rises, right? And I feel like the more knowledge we know, we just get caught and we interact with other people with that same level of knowledge, right? So let's take RTS, for example, right? You learn some exercise mechanic, and you start speaking like fucking nerdy to more nerds. And then you're so far, you've been in that rabbit hole so long that you forget what people down here are like, right? Where they probably don't understand what you're saying. And that's why people think, you know, things like that are like culty, right? Because you have your own language, the way that you say things, but you forget that, okay, where these people are, like here, they're where you were many years. And I think a lot of people quickly forget where they were, and then they struggle. They only communicate in that way.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that, because like obviously I mentor coaches, and I was going through some mechanic stuff with a coach. And for me, like my client, my coach had a very valid question. And you know, when you take it for granted, like we know what a moment arm is, for example. And someone asked me a question in relation to like moment arms or forces. And the answer was, for me, not for them, and I say for me because I come a little bit further along, for me the answer was so basic, but it had been that long since I had to simplify it down to its core message that I questioned myself, and I was like, is it this? And it took me about a minute or so just to go back into my memory and be like, yeah, it is that. And I spoke to the coach, and then after the call ended, I went back to my notes and I double checked it, and thank God it was right. But it made me just stop and think. It was like, it was still quite advanced because the coach asked a very valid question. But for me, it was like, when you learn to sprint, you don't remember how to jog. You just know jogging is a thing.
Just know you need to move your legs.
Exactly.
Right?
But then when someone says, when you jog, do you put your left leg forward first? And you're like,
do you move the same arm and the same leg?
Exactly. And it's like, I'll just do it automatically now. And then I had to go and think, and I was like, which arm goes first? And it was like a kind of, not a pinch me moment, it was like a moment where I was like, that is true understanding, when you can be however far advanced you are, but you can talk to someone that is advanced as you, someone that's one rung down, someone that's 10 rungs down, or someone that's just starting their journey. If you can convey the message to all of those people in a way they understand, that's where you're an effective communicator. And I think I want to give a shout out to Michael Golden from Integra, because he's one of the best communicators in terms of education that I've come across. And like, no one sounds silly, and he can go there and there and there. And like, if I'm being honest, I try to model a lot of my teaching in a similar way, where it doesn't matter who someone is. I want to be able to explain that in a way, whatever the topic is, in a way that someone that's a Gen Pop client could understand and be like, that makes sense, with no scientific words at all.
Yeah, Michael's the GOAT, man. Definitely, I agree with that. Like, in terms of, I think Michael's helped me understand and learn and teach like so much better. Like, for me, it was always getting people, he's very good at getting people curious. So he makes you think rather than spoon feed the answer to you, right? And I think he's very comfortable with silence.
Exactly.
I think that's a big part of his trait, where you might ask him a question and then he asks you like 2-3 questions back for you to then answer, to eventually kind of almost solve your own problems, right? And he doesn't sit there and go, you're wrong or whatever. He just lets you marinate in all your thoughts.
And that's interesting, like, and I'm maybe going to a little bit of a tangent here, but like, do you think, and I think it applies to me somewhat before, do you think that PTs talk in a more scientific way because they want to prove themselves to their client? In terms of, if we're talking about a calorie deficit and I just say, eat more protein, have this amount of protein on your plate, they might think, well, I could have done that myself. Whereas if we say, oh, there's 20 grams of protein in this amount of salmon and however many grams of fat in this amount of salmon, you should weigh it in your weighing scale. Like, we can go into the molecular depths of it, but in a way, if we don't do that and we say the simple part, I'm actually doing my job, like, because they could have just got that from anywhere, kind of thing. And I believe, definitely for me, when I was a little bit less experienced, I tried to go above and beyond, if that's what it's called, to justify my value. Oh, look at me, I know a lot about insert the topic here, and I'll give you all my knowledge because that's what you're paying me for. Whereas I think now I'm just like, I'll give you exactly what you need. And that might be just weigh this in your hand, or that might be the molecular science behind whatever we're talking about.
Yeah, it depends on what the client likes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that. But yeah, why I said the other side, where I feel like people are in their own bubble, is 'cause I kind of experienced that myself in terms of doing BJJ. So when we do the classes, I felt like the instructors, were they're all black belts, right? And you're like, this guy's never done nothing, like, you never rolled in your life. And then they'll say things like, "Oh, guard retention," or framing, and things like all these. And in I remember the first week, I was like, "What the fuck is that?" It's like, "Get your guard." I was like, "Yeah, you ain't got no sword or
Bang,
shield."
straight in the face.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know, like frame. Like, what the fuck is framing? Do you know what I mean? So I feel like sometimes, and a part of that is that they don't know who's turning up to class, right? But I think sometimes it's better to just assume that I'm completely like no idea what's going on.
That's really interesting you say that as well, because without inadvertently, I think I do that a lot of times. And correct me if I'm wrong, because what I think you say, or what I try to do now, and it's going to sound bad if I say it how I want to say it. I speak to people when I first meet them, coaches, I'll say, not people, coaches, as if they know nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll say stuff, and I will say to them, "Forgive me if this is too simplistic, we'll move on very quickly." But I'll say it as if I'm talking to someone brand new, because there has been times in the past where I fell victim to that. Like I say something expecting someone to know what I'm talking about, and sometimes they'll say, "Mate, what you're on about?" And other times they'll stay silent, so I think they've got it, and they ain't got a clue. And it's only when I've gone completely down the rabbit hole, does that make sense? And I'm like, which part doesn't make sense? And it was something at the very beginning, and I'm like, sorry about that. Okay, then let's go back to, and then I'll go, so now what I do is I'll start as simple as I know, and then I'll layer on. And sometimes that's very quickly if someone can keep up, but other times we stay here for 1 week, 2 weeks, however long it takes, and then we move on. Is that similar to what you were describing in BJJ? Like, would it have been beneficial for you, for the black belt, to not say, put your guard up, to say, "Hi, him, do you know what our guard is? Forgive me if you already do, but do you know what our guard is?"
I think even, like, it doesn't even have to be, because it's not a one-to-one thing. It could just be like, you've got like, almost like, I think the hardest thing about, like, obviously this is a group setting, right, is that you have various different people that are in the session. You might have one person like me who's like so new, and then you've got other people who've been training for like 6 months plus. And you've got maybe some other white belts that have been there for like a year, right? So it's like, it's hard to cater to everyone, to then be like, "Oh, this is a guard." And it's like, that guy fucking knew that it was a guard, right?
But do you know what I do? Because that's a very good point as well. And as you're speaking, I'm going back into my own communication style, and it's like, so like in that scenario, like when I'm teaching a workshop or something, what I'll do is, like, some people attend multiple workshops and they'll know, and my clients as well, some of them, so they'll know what we've spoken about. So rather than me go over the same topic, I'll get them to do it. So like, let's say you know what a guard is now, and one of the sessions, it's a group, I'll be like, "All right, get your guard up, him. Just remind us all, what's your guard again?" And then that gets, even though you know it, your attitude goes from, I've covered this before, to, hang on, he's calling me out here. Let me just, what's my guard? Yeah, my guard is da-da-da, and it gets you more involved. And I think that
person learns it even more.
Exactly, because one of the reasons why I started teaching, and that's a tangent, I'll come back to it in a minute. One of the reasons I started teaching was because it cemented it in my mind. Like, there's a phrase, I don't know the exact phrase, I'm going to butcher it, but like, once you teach, you truly understand the topic. And the tangent I was going to go off was, previously, that was one of the reasons why I used to go so in depth with my clients, because I would teach it to them, not so they could know it, but so I remember it. And I can't remember who told me this, but it's a really good thing. So like, sticking with the mechanics, we go in a workshop, you've learned how to assess the hip. So we'll say hip flexion. And then on the Monday, the session afterwards, I will go and speak about hip flexion, but I'll speak to my client, but to myself. So I'll say, I'm just looking at hip flexion here. I'm going to go through hip flexion is when the angle of the hip goes a little bit narrow or whatever. Then I'll say, to my client, I'll say, "Don't worry. I'm just moving your hip closer to your chest." And I'll say in my language and in their language. And my language is for me to cement it. And their language is because they don't know what hip flexion means. And that for me might be, I don't do that anymore. But when I was learning a lot of stuff, that was my way of learning the science, but not being too complex for my client, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think, mastery comes from, you have to teach. I genuinely believe that, like that, and I think that's what in BJ. I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I think that's what they try to get you to do in BJJ. Is like when you get past like brown belt or whatever, you are now allowed to like coach people. So I think that's what they kind of want you to do as well.
But I would narrow that down a little bit more and say you have to teach or be able to teach at a basic level.
Yeah.
Because that means you're not regurgitating the knowledge anymore. You've internalized it and you're able then to give it to someone that's brand new.
That's why sometimes I like to speak to other white belts to help me out, because I feel like it's so fresh in their mind. Like they've just been doing it. They may not know all the details or whatever that maybe a black belt would know, but also I feel like maybe the black belt will tell me too much information. I'm like, just give me the core basic stuff that I need that is going to help me improve, and then I can work on, you know, the some more finer things as we go along, right? But as long as it looks relatively similar, that's the main thing for me at the moment. And I think sometimes it's like you got to meet people where they're at. But when you're so advanced, you complete, like in your head you think, oh, but this is really important here. It's like we're thinking, oh, but resistance profile is so important, and to us it really is, because we've nailed down the core fundamentals of, we know how to exert effort and we know, you know, how to brace ourselves, right? But if you don't know those two things, the resistance profile really doesn't make a difference at that point, right? And I think it seems like a similar kind of thing. I've been analyzing a lot of coaching at the moment, like, because like this is kind of almost like personal training that I'm getting at the moment, right? When you're learning this new skill, and it's so heavily in terms of skill based, so it's really like making me question certain things, which is really cool.
But that's where, like, because you mentioned like communication and teaching styles, and I say this as us as educators, but I would also say as personal trainers in general, we are educators to our clients. Now, I'm going to caveat that with our clients sometimes don't want to be educated in the way that we want to educate them, but they still need the education, because let's say they come to lose 10 kilos. Yes, caloric deficit, but we have to teach them the methodology to keep the 10 kilos off once they're not our clients anymore. So if we keep that in mind, we are teachers. And it's our ability to teach them in a way that they understand. And I think to do that, you said you're learning a lot from the BJJ stuff. And even though it's in no way related to what you do as a living, there are going to be some things that you'll be like, that principle worked very well in this context. It will probably work very well in this context when I'm talking to my clients as well. And this is where, when you're learning stuff, it's really good to learn from people, places, things, not just within the industry, within different industries. Like, I've learned so much about how to be a communicator, not from personal training at all, just from life experiences. And it's taught me to communicate, which I can now apply to the context when I'm with a general population client or when I'm with a personal trainer.
Yeah.
So what do you think makes a great communicator?
I think we all go back to like how Michael, it's like our own experiences. I think that makes a big difference in terms of communication. If you have people remember stories, right? And humor is also a very good way of teaching as well, I feel. So when you can create a memorable story or a memorable joke or humor, people will never forget it. And I think that's, for me, that's why I try to, that's the kind of style that I try to create. I think autonomy as well, in the sense of I do feel like you don't want to spoon feed people too much. There is a certain elements that you probably do need to like explain, but outside of that, you want to empower people to actually understand and learn through like further questioning of them, right? That's why I think like learning to ask questions from someone and of someone having those there's so much things that, you know, pair that you could like from a teaching perspective. If you're able to question someone deeply, that's how they're going to learn, because they are the ones answering the question, right? And I think one of the things I heard before was you don't learn anything that you don't already know. It's just when you actually learn it, it's just come to the forefront of your mind and you're like, oh, you know, but you actually already knew it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's
It's deep.
Yeah, we'll come back to that because that's sent me down a rabbit hole. So like you're telling, so I won't ever learn anything that I don't already know. So calculus, I have no idea what it is. You telling me you already know calculus?
Probably in some way, you could probably relate to it.
Okay then. So tying an experience to the knowledge.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
Kind of.
Yeah.
We'll pause that part because that'll just go me in a rabbit hole. But
I never really thought too deeply about it, but certain things that I think about, it's like, okay, cool.
Well, it's like they say, is it 6 degrees of separation?
Yeah.
We're always 6. So from
that's crazy.
From Donald Trump, I am 6 people or 7 people away from Donald Trump, and in my head,
should we work it out?
No, because you'll scare me. Like, imagine I'm just 6 people away from some crazy guy that's done something.
It'll be one of your clients, isn't it?
Yeah, it would definitely. One of my clients has like worked with someone or know someone that's an ambassador, so on and so forth. But like, if that is true, then what you're saying could also be true if you apply it in a certain way.
Yeah.
So I think being a good communicator agrees with what you say, to be fair. But I think it's in 2 parts. So I think the first part, as you said, is the ability to ask questions and the ability to ask the right question. And for me, I believe I'm a good communicator. I think my portfolio of results will suggest that as well. And I think one of the big things about me when it comes to asking questions, I don't always ask the right question, but I'm not afraid to ask the same question in a different way. And I might ask the same question 3 or 4 times, but the time it does hit, that's when everything changes. And the ability to ask that question in the right way is really important. And then the second part of that is, once you've asked the question in the right way, you've then got to be able to listen. And I think going back to coaches that are a little bit insecure, which I have been in the past, I talk at my clients. So when someone comes through the door for a consultation, communication is, your package is, you get 24/7 WhatsApp, you get a food plan, you get this, you want to lose 10 kilos, cool, we'll get you on this diet, we'll get you on that diet. Whereas me now would be, how can I help you? And I'll shut up and I'll let you talk for 10, 15 minutes. Then I'll gather my thoughts and then I'll say, cool, it sounds like. Then I can give an appropriate answer that allows me to effectively communicate and get you bought in to what you want. So it's asking the right questions in the right way, but then being able to listen to and interpret the answers.
Yeah. Actually, funny enough, communication doesn't require you to actually speak that much.
No. And
actually, you listen a lot and you just need to say 1 or 2 things. I guess maybe that's what keeps it
Is that
simple.
right?
Yeah.
As a My Wife and Kids episode. Is that right? You don't watch My Wife and Kids, have you?
Yeah.
You watch Calvin. Is that right?
I can't remember it as good as you.
The big black guy. Yeah. I'll send it you afterwards. I'll send it you. For anyone else, you're not in the loop. This is an inside joke. But yeah, I think the reason what you said was so important is because I have Fathom now, the note taker for my calls, and Fathom tells you how much you've spoken. And a lot of my calls, I've spoken a lot less than the other person. Now, sometimes it's different when I'm explaining a complex topic, but a lot of the times my client speaks a lot more, and that's just because I ask so much questions, and it's just so I understand the context before I give an answer.
Yeah, I think that's part of that autonomy, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're asking the right questions, they're answering those questions themselves. Like you said, this goes back to the thing, they're learning because they already know what the answer is. So then you're just coaxing it out of them.
Yes, because they'll ask me a question and what do you think? Or how would you go about that? 8 times out of 10, cool, do that. And obviously, like, it might not be exactly what I would have said, but it's not far enough away for me to say, actually, hang on, don't do that at all. So the learning would be, do that. You come back next week. Oh yeah, that worked. Great. You come back next week. Oh, that worked, and then we can have a further communication upon what would you do differently next time.
Yeah. And also, like, I go back to Michael as well when we did this in RTS. I think one of the hot topics way back when we did it was about reverse banding and top banding, right? So it's like, which one's better, or what's the kind of difference, right? Do they kind of do the same thing? And he put it on his whiteboard or paper thing that he has got, right? And we ended up answering all the questions and putting basically the list of all the things, and that still cements in my head. And I was the one that asked the question, but because we came as a collective, as a class, to answer it, it made me really start to think and break it down. And that's a big kind of moment in I guess teaching and just learning for me.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah. And like, because we are speaking as educators, and I want to always reinforce that even if you're listening to this and you're not an educator in terms of you coach coaches, you are an educator to your clients. And on your list, you've got the list in front of you. You've mentioned something about how much you speak scientific versus how much you speak in non-scientific words. And can you remember who done this quote? I think it might be Tom Purvis. Think science, speak client.
Yeah.
Is that Tom Purvis's quote?
I think it's Tom's.
Yeah. So like, think science, speak clients. I learned that or heard that very early on in my career, and it stayed with me. And essentially going back to like whatever I learn on my course, that's the science. I think like that, but that doesn't come out to my client. So like, if I'm doing an assessment and I'm assessing shoulder flexion, that's your shoulder going up like that, I won't say to my client, I'm assessing your shoulder flexion, I'm looking at your available range in your shoulder. All I'll say is, sit with your back nice and straight, move your arm to the ceiling. I'm thinking about shoulder flexion, but I'm speaking to them, just move your arm to the ceiling. I'm just going to see how high you can get. Cool. That's where we're starting like pull down from. And for me, I'm thinking that way in my head, but I'm speaking this way to my client because they don't need to know shoulder flexion. What can be opposing shoulder flexion or restricting shoulder flexion? It could be anterior delt, lat, rear delt, I'm just saying, where do you feel that? You can only get here? Where do you feel that? Point to me for me. There. Perfect. Make a note. Possible anterior delt restriction or lack of strength, shoulder flexor.
I almost hate it when people talk to me in that way, where they're too, even though I know it, they just go off at like, they're like, oh, do the shoulder. I'm like, just tell me to lift my arm up. Because, you know, when you're in that scenario, usually it's like, I've switched off. Like I don't want to think too much. When you tell me like right side shoulder flexion, adduction or whatever, I'm like, I got to think about it for like a split second before I do it. Versus if you just said up to the ceiling, it's like, it's automatic, right? Yeah, so actually, even though I know that stuff, I'm like, I much prefer it.
Exactly.
If someone spoke to me normally.
And if you know it and you don't like it, imagine your client that doesn't know it. Yeah. They're going to hate it. Like,
that's
what on earth are you talking about?
I never speak in that way.
Yeah.
But I think that's worse because almost I forget as well. I'm like, oh shit, what does it mean?
Yeah, but that's why, you know, when a moment ago when I mentioned, I'll repeat it. So I say to myself, and now before I do it out in the open, I'm assessing shoulder flexion. I'm looking for this. Now I'll say that first part under my breath. My client probably can't hear me. Okay, I'm looking at shoulder flexion. Cool. And then I'll speak more clearly to them. Just lift your arm up to the ceiling. So then I've got both ways in my head and they're both associated with each other.
Yeah, it's a good way because when I look at like muscles, like I know the origin insertions, right? So I'm like, yeah, somewhere here kind of thing. But I don't really say it that much. So I'm like, oh fuck, I don't really know the exact like name or whatever Latin word it is.
The funny thing about that is during lockdown, I was shit hot on anatomy. Intertubercular groove this, bony landmark that. Within 6 months on a gym floor, do you think I could remember? I know the general area, I know the muscle function. Do you think I could remember the scientific name? Does it actually matter? Not really. Mm. It matters in terms of, okay, then sometimes anteriorly or medially or laterally, because that will affect, is it an internal rotator or an external rotator? But the actual Latin name, you probably don't need to know.
Yeah, that's why I've not really been like, I should really figure out what that name is again, you know?
And some things stick, because like I've got a few rhymes in my head that make some things stick, but some of it I'm just like, I need to know if it's medial or lateral because that impacts stuff. But if the name doesn't impact the function, I don't need to know the name. It's just on the humerus. It's on the arm somewhere, or it's on the radius somewhere, or it's on the femur somewhere. Yeah.
It's on this bone on the outside.
Yeah, just there. It does that. What does it do? It does that. Like, cool,
exactly.
Done. Yeah,
that's exactly how I feel.
Is there anything else you want to cover with this one?
I think just in terms, the last thing I would say is just, I think one of the things about communication that a lot of coaches do tend to do is we skip steps in terms of strategy. So if someone comes and they say, oh, I'm hungry or whatever, right? A lot of the times coaches are, I'm a problem solver. So the communication is, let me fix this for you by telling you this hack. And this goes back to, we're talking about listening, right? Actually, you need to start asking those questions beforehand to figure out why is this person hungry in the first place for that strategy or the hack that actually is gonna work, right? Because you could, like, the thing with coaching as well is like there's a lot of symptoms which are very similar, and I tie it over to like being dead and being in a coma. They look very similar, right? But the solution to both couldn't be far different, right?
One's buried.
Yeah, one's buried and one's like on life support, right? So, but you don't want to mix them up, but they look very similar. And it's the same, like hunger can look very similar and have different reasons for it to occur. And that potentially is why a lot of clients get stuck, is because they've been given the wrong strategy. They've been given the wrong remedy, right? What you're doing as a coach is equivalent to a client coming in and go, I've got a headache. Cool. Look, here's a paracetamol. Take these drugs. Take this. It's like, yeah, but the actual problem is that this guy, when he drink more water, or this guy's, when he gets back home, he just slams his head against the wall for no reason. It's like, yeah, maybe if he stopped doing that,
day at the office.
Yeah, if he just stopped doing that, he would not have a headache. He doesn't need it doesn't matter how much medication he has, right?
Very good point. That's a very good point.
Unless it's like some sort of mental health thing.
Yeah. we'll end on that poignant point.
All right. Cool. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, you can find me on socials. I'm at Gym with him, and my co-host Jawade is at Jawade Graham Coach. And we'll see you all in the next Coach's Hour. Bye-bye.